Ever feel like you're the only one who sees the world a certain way?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like you're going through something tough
Yeah,
and nobody else gets it.
definitely.
But then you find like a book or a show or something,
Right.
and it's like, whoa, there are other people who
Yeah.
think like this.
It's a good feeling.
It is.
Yeah.
It's like you found your tribe,
Yeah.
and that's what we're looking at today.
Okay.
How a podcast
Uh-huh.
can bring people together.
Interesting. Like a community.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
You sent us an episode of You're Wrong About
Right.
for this deep dive.
I remember.
It's their 5th anniversary special,
Oh, wow.
and they asked listeners to share how the show's impacted their lives.
Interesting.
And some of these stories are pretty amazing.
I bet.
Like, one thing that stood out is how many people
Yeah.
found comfort in You're Wrong About
Mm-hmm.
during the pandemic,
That makes sense.
when everyone was so isolated.
Yeah, right.
This podcast was a way to connect with other people.
For sure.
There's this one story about a listener
Okay.
who went through a bad breakup,
Oh, no.
and they'd go on these long walks every day
Hmm.
with just the podcast for company.
Wow.
It's like the hosts became their friends,
Yeah, I can see that.
helping them through that tough time.
It's the power of audio, isn't it?
Right?
We listen to podcasts alone, usually in our own little world,
Yeah.
and it creates this kind of intimacy you don't get with other stuff.
True.
It's like they're talking right to you.
Exactly. Sharing their thoughts.
Yeah.
Another listener
Yeah.
said they were taking care of their wife in the hospital,
Oh, wow.
and the podcast gave him a break from all the stress.
I can imagine.
They actually called it a lifeline.
That's powerful.
And then there were all these new moms
Okay.
stuck at home,
Right.
feeling disconnected,
Yeah.
and You're Wrong About help them
Mm-hmm.
feel like they were a part of something.
A
bigger conversation.
Exactly. It's like media can create these
Yeah,
unexpected communities.
totally.
Have you ever felt that?
Oh, for sure.
Like with a podcast or a book?
Yeah, definitely.
Where you feel like you're part of something bigger?
Like you're not alone.
Exactly. And it's not just about finding comfort.
Right.
You're wrong about election. Also sparked a lot of intellectual curiosity.
Oh, that's cool.
Listeners were inspired to rethink
Okay.
their understanding of all sorts of things. Cultural trends.
Interesting.
One listener said,
Yeah.
the show's take on the satanic panic
Okay.
helped them make sense of their own family trauma.
Wow.
They always felt like something was off
Yeah.
about the whole narrative.
Right.
And the podcast gave them a way to,
Understand it?
yeah, like see it in a new light.
That's really powerful.
It shows how You're Wrong About often tackles topics that are still relevant, even though they seem like they're from the past.
Exactly.
Yeah.
By revisiting these events,
Mm-hmm.
they help listeners connect history to their own lives.
Interesting.
And it's not just about the past.
Okay.
Another listener said the podcast changed their
Mm.
whole perspective on Princess Diana.
Really?
They realized how much of what they believed
Mm-hmm.
was shaped by the media at the time.
Right.
And You're Wrong About helped them see her
Yeah.
as a more complex person,
I see.
not just a media image.
It's so easy to accept the
Well,
dominant narrative, right?
Right.
Especially with someone like
Yeah.
Princess Diana, who is
Yeah.
constantly in the spotlight.
Exactly.
But You're Wrong About,
Mhm.
they encourage us to question that.
To dig deeper.
Yes. And look at the human side of things.
I'm like, they're giving listeners permission to think critically
Yeah.
and challenge the status quo.
Which is so important these days.
I know, right? With so much information
It's overwhelming.
coming at us from all sides.
Absolutely.
And speaking of challenging the status quo,
Mm-hmm.
the podcast also got people to do their own research.
Oh, cool.
The hosts would often mention books
Yeah.
or articles that influenced their thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and people would go and seek those out,
That's awesome.
wanting to learn more.
Makes sense.
It's amazing how a single podcast
Yeah.
can spark that kind of
Ah.
intellectual curiosity
Totally.
and even empower people to become more active learners.
I love that.
It reminds us that learning doesn't have to stop
Right.
after we finish school.
Definitely not.
You're Wrong About shows us that it can be an ongoing thing,
Yes.
and we can enjoy discovering new perspectives
Absolutely.
and challenging ourselves.
It's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It keeps us growing
For sure.
Keeps our minds sharp.
Totally.
It really makes you think. Like, have you ever come across something like a book or a movie
Right.
that just totally changed your view
Oh, yeah.
on something?
Absolutely. Sometimes it's a little unsettling,
Right.
but it's also like,
Yeah,
wow, there's so much more to this.
exactly.
Like more to learn, more nuance. And that kind of brings us to another cool thing about You're Wrong about.
What's that?
It's how they approach things with
Yeah.
empathy and understanding.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They're not just throwing facts at you. They
Mhm.
want to understand the people involved.
Yeah.
And they do it really well.
It's so sensitive and compassionate.
Yeah, it's like
Right.
they really care about
Yeah.
getting it right.
One listener said,
Mm-hmm.
the episode on the DC sniper
Okay.
totally changed their view.
Interesting.
They're always focused on like
Yeah.
the fear and the tragedy.
Right.
But the podcast helped them see the
That's
shooters
okay.
as people, like with their own reasons and struggles.
That's powerful.
It's easy to dehumanize people,
Yeah.
especially when they do
Right.
awful things.
Mm-hmm.
But You're Wrong about reminds us
Yeah.
everyone has a story.
It's true.
And even in dark situations,
Yeah.
there's this human element.
We can't forget that.
Right. And it's not just about
Yeah.
understanding people who've done terrible things.
Oh, okay.
Another listener talked about
Yeah.
the episode on cannibalism,
Oh, wow.
and it made them more empathetic
Interesting.
toward people who had to do that.
To survive.
Yeah, like in the survival situations,
Mhm.
they realized it wasn't about
Right.
being savage.
Mm.
It was about desperation
Yeah.
and doing whatever it took.
To stay alive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a great example of how
Yeah.
the podcast challenges
Mm-hmm.
our preconceived notions
Okay.
and helps us see the world
Yeah.
from different angles.
Different perspective.
Right. It's about understanding the context,
Yeah.
the motivations.
The why.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Not just judging from afar.
It makes you think
Yeah.
about how often we just consume news without really thinking about
Right.
the people involved.
Like their side of the story.
Exactly. You think
Yeah.
we lack empathy sometimes
I think
when we talk about
especially with tough topics.
It's hard.
It is.
Especially these days.
Yeah.
Everything's so black and white.
Right.
You're wrong about reminds us
Mhm.
there's always more to the story.
Yeah. And they also highlight
Yep.
the importance of nuance.
Oh, for sure.
They're not afraid to say,
Mhm.
hey, this is complicated.
Right.
There's not always a simple answer.
It's refreshing.
Isn't
Like, in a world that wants easy solutions,
Mhm.
they embrace the messiness.
Exactly. The gray areas.
Yeah.
And that really connected with
Mhm.
listeners.
It makes sense.
It reminds us that it's okay to be wrong sometimes, to question things,
Yeah.
and be open to changing our minds.
I love that. And speaking of change,
Yeah.
this whole deep dive shows
Mhm.
the impact a podcast can have.
Uh-huh.
It's inspiring to see
What is
how their passion
for the show
yeah,
inspires listeners to take action,
to do things,
to explore new ideas.
to get involved.
Exactly.
Mm.
One listener was so inspired,
Okay.
they started their own podcast
Wow. What about?
about women in history
Cool.
who've been kind of overlooked.
That's awesome.
They said You're Wrong about.
Yeah.
Gave them the confidence to do it.
To share their own story.
Yeah, the research and ideas.
That's so great.
And create a space for
Yeah.
voices that don't always get heard.
It's a ripple effect.
Right. And it's not just podcasts.
Okay.
Another listener used the show
Uh,
in their college thesis.
really?
Yeah. It was
What
about
is it about?
the Salem witch trials.
Interesting.
They said the podcast helped them
Yeah.
understand the history
Mhm.
in a way their textbooks didn't.
Wow.
And it gave them a new way
A new way.
to look at the events.
That's fascinating.
It shows how the podcast's
Yeah.
analytical framework
Yeah.
can be used in other areas.
It's not just about history.
Exactly. It's about thinking critically, questioning sources.
Connecting the dots.
Yeah. And the podcast had a big impact on people's personal lives, too.
Oh, wow.
People shared how it helped them
Uh-huh.
through tough times.
Yeah.
Like dealing with grief
Mm-hmm.
or trauma
Okay.
or mental health stuff.
That makes sense.
One person even said
Yeah.
it helped them leave a bad relationship.
Wow.
They said the show helped them
Uh-huh.
see their own worth
Yeah.
and gave them the strength
Your strength.
to make a change.
That's so powerful.
Shows how a podcast can
Yeah.
be more than just entertainment.
Totally.
It can create a space
Set the space for
people to feel
Mhm.
seen and heard.
like they belong.
Exactly. And that can be
Yeah.
life-changing.
Absolutely. And a lot of listeners said you're wrong about help them understand themselves better.
Like who they are.
Yeah, especially people who are neurodivergent or LGBTQ+.
That's so important.
It is.
To feel seen and accepted.
For sure. It's heartwarming to see how the show's approach connected with people who often feel marginalized.
Yeah, like they don't fit in.
Right. It shows the power of representation and how media can create a sense of belonging.
It makes you realize how much we need those spaces.
Spaces where
we can be ourselves.
Without judgment.
Exactly.
You're wrong about that.
It does.
It reminds us that we're all human with our own experiences.
Our own stories.
And those differences should be celebrated.
Not feared.
Exactly. And sometimes those differences lead us
to challenge the stories.
The stories we've been told.
Yeah, about ourselves and the world.
Which is something You're Wrong About does so well.
Right. They give a voice.
To people who've been silenced.
Like
women, minorities.
Victims of injustice.
It's about recognizing that history is often told from one perspective.
The perspective of the powerful.
Yeah. And we need to seek out other viewpoints.
To get the full picture.
Right. And it's not just about the past.
Okay.
The show helps us understand.
Understand what?
Current events. Cultural trends. By providing context.
Yeah. Historical context.
And challenging assumptions. Okay. Like their episodes on the obesity epidemic and the war on drugs. Really helped people see those issues differently.
In a new light.
Yeah.
Free from the
choruses and misinformation.
It's so important to be able to step back and look at things critically.
To understand how we got here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to think about different solutions.
And You're Wrong About gives us the tools to do that.
Like they always say.
Yeah.
It's okay to be wrong.
Right.
The important thing is to be open to new information. And change our minds when we learn more.
Absolutely. The show really encourages us to be more critical.
Of what we see and hear.
Of the information we're taking in.
Exactly. To question things.
Yeah. And not just accept everything.
Especially these days.
Oh my gosh.
All right.
It's so important.
With all the information overload.
And fake news.
It can be hard to know what to believe.
Right.
But You're Wrong About gives us the tools to sort through it all.
Tools.
To figure out what's what.
Like critical thinking skills.
Exactly. It's not just about being entertained. It's about being informed.
Engage.
Yeah. Like active participants.
In the world around us.
It's amazing to see how a podcast can do that.
It really is.
It shows the power of
storytelling.
Empathy.
And
critical thinking.
To connect with people.
On a deep level.
And make a difference.
It's inspiring.
So what does all this mean for us?
You as listeners.
As we try to understand this crazy world.
This complicated world.
Right. It seems like we're all craving more nuance and empathy.
In the stories we hear.
Exactly.
And the information we get.
So what role can podcasts
and other media play in our lives?
In helping us connect and understand.
It's something to think about.
It really is.
Yeah.
This whole deep dive has shown us.
What has it shown us?
How You're Wrong About became more than
just a podcast.
Yeah. It became like a source of community and comfort.
And growth.
Yeah. For so many people.
The stories we heard, they highlight something important. What's that?
Our need to connect with each other.
Yeah.
To understand each other.
Especially when things are tough.
Exactly.
Pretty inspiring.
It is.
It reminds us that we can all make a difference.
Even in small ways.
Like just by sharing our stories.
Oh, listening to someone else's.
And just being kind.
And understanding.
So think about the podcasts that have impacted you.
The ones that have meant something to you.
Yeah. What shows have you found meaningful or inspiring?
Maybe it's time to share those with others.
Spread the love.
You see how they resonate.
You never know.
Right.
You might inspire someone else.
To go on their own deep dive.
Exactly.